Hello, everybody, and welcome to Rappin With ReefBum, a live talk show on YouTube. I am your host, Keith Berkelhamer, and each episode I have a guest from the reef keeping community. And today I'd like to welcome Scott Leif, the Director of Customer Support at Royal Exclusiv USA. Scott is coming live from Montana. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Keith. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Scott, these are certainly some strange times and uncertain times for everybody in the world, you know, in terms of the coronavirus. How are you and your family dealing with all this in Montana? Is it hitting you guys, or is it not that bad?
Well, you know, surprisingly, when you look at the states, you know, and you look at the numbers as far as the outbreak goes, Montana is second to last in terms of virus infections and virus. Well, actually, we're the last state in the country in terms of number of viruses to the population count, and second only to Alaska in terms of the least amount of virus infections out here. So Montana is probably the least impacted. I guess our governor out here did call a stay-at-home order into effect. So pretty much all our restaurants and bars and everything shut down other than takeout only. And from our aspect, that's probably been the one thing that hurts because, you know, we're isolated out here being 12 miles out of the nearest town, which would be Whitefish, Montana. And we're fortunate enough to have a bar and grill 1,000 feet up the road on the lake. But bar and grill is pretty much shut down other than Saturday and Sunday where we can go get takeout only. So that's, kind of been a bummer for us in terms of, social activities. But on the flip side, it's great to go grocery shopping right now. Grocery stores are pretty well empty, no lines. So, that side of it's real nice.
Yeah, and are the shelves bare out there? Are you getting any, do you find toilet paper?
Yeah, we can get toilet paper. The biggest issue we found was Costco and dog food. Dog food was kind of hit and miss for a little while there when you got two Great Danes. Being able to get your dog food's kind of a concern, but we managed to stay ahead of the curve there, and we've been, reasonably well stocked on dog food, so it hasn't impacted us too much. And outside of that, I couldn't think of a better place to be, quarantined or stuck in my house than Montana.
Yeah, you're a lucky man. So you and I are friends on Facebook, and you post a lot of pictures of this. You call it a homestead on the river here in Montana. And I've certainly been very intrigued, and I thought it would be really, really cool if maybe you shot a video for us, kind of like a walkthrough of the house and the property and the scenery. So let's take a look at that before we dive into the reef keeping stuff that we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to roll the video right now, and then we'll come back in a couple of minutes. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
All right, here we go.
A beautiful spring morning in Northwest. Quick tour of our property. We moved out here in January from Southern California. Went to boarding school out here in the early to mid 80s and wanted to move back ever since. And we found a fixer-upper on 1.5 acres of riverfront property out here. See, I've had my hands full since we moved here. You can see our hen house that I built. We have 12 hens that'll be supplying us with eggs. That is the greenhouse. It was pretty dilapidated when we moved here. I've since ripped the walls out, ripped the roof off, rebuilt the walls, rebuilt the roof. Got to rip some new wood paneling for the siding, paint it, put the windows back in. And then you can see I've got some barrels and a big tank over there that'll be part of an aquaponic system that'll utilize fish to feed the plants. These blue barrels will be cut in half down the middle to make the planters. So we'll have a little aquaponic system in there growing our vegetables. It's our garage shop there, and I've got all my wood tools, table saw, chop saw, all that stuff set up on the porch. We've got our Stillwater River there. Looking forward to a nice spring trout run. We have an eagle right there flying overhead. That is a golden eagle. Our little well house. Off in the distance over there, you can see behind the trees the Stillwater Bar and Grill. We're about 12 miles outside of Whitefish, Montana. but we have a bar and grill about 1,000 feet from the house. And just beyond the bar and grill is the lower Stillwater Lake. So plenty of fishing, and we're situated right in the middle of the Stillwater National Forest. Kind of hard to see over there, but we've got the lower Stillwater Lake there, and there's dozens of lakes within miles of our house. Our little slice of heaven. You can see this trench here. We had a water line issue when we first moved in and didn't have pressure to the house, so had to have the new line put in from the well house to the house, and still got to clean that up. And working on getting the yard in shape, planting trees. We've got pear trees over here, a couple apple trees over there to plant, a plum tree in the front, cherry tree that I got to plant, and I'm going to get working on the garden here this weekend, as well as the greenhouse to get it all set up. In a couple of weeks, we'll start moving our chickens into the hen house, and I'll get their little pen assembled. And well, that is the quick spring tour of our little homestead here in Montana.
All right, Scott. So my question is, where's the reef tank going to go?
Well, that's a good question. There's a lot of you guys may realize, or you may have seen me or seen videos before with me. I had a 500-gallon reef tank, 700-gallon system, and that tank was up and running in my house for 23 years straight. It was an extremely healthy reef tank, and when we decided to sell our home in California, we kind of hoped that the buyer would want the tank, but as it turned out, they didn't. And in a hurry, I had to break down the tank and sell off all my livestock and some of the equipment and stuff. But with this new acquisition in our place in Montana, we're in the midst of a remodel, and the whole prospect of a reef tank is kind of on the shelf right now, in favor of getting our house remodeled, completing the remodel, which I'm pretty much doing myself, and a lot of other projects. So unfortunately, the reef tank is not a priority right now. It might be something I'll revisit next year once the remodel and stuff is done. In the meantime, I'm going to combine my love for fish with some necessities, an aquaponics system for our greenhouse, which will incorporate fish, and some of my expertise and controller, knowledge, to at least put that into play where, it'll put food on our plate and whatnot. But right now, the reef tank, unfortunately, isn't a priority, but obviously I'm very much involved in the reefing community, both with Royal Exclusiv and other activities that I'm involved with.
So how long have you been in the hobby, Scott? How many years have you been a hobbyist? And I know you're working for Royal Exclusiv right now, and you're in the business, so to speak. But when did you get started, and how did you get started?
I got started, it would have been around 1987. I was renting a bedroom from a guy when I first moved out of the house, and I went and bought a fish tank. I think it was a 60-gallon tank, set up saltwater setup, and it would lionfish and stuff like that. I was young and dumb back then. I bounced a check on the store, and they came back and repossessed the tank on me several months later. And the fish that I bought elsewhere, too, it was kind of a stupid thing. And so that was where I kind of got started. And then a handful of months or a year later, a friend gave me a 90-gallon tank. I set that up. I got an eel, and that wasn't big enough. So I ended up getting a 100-gallon tank, and that wasn't big enough. And the next thing I knew, I had a 240-gallon acrylic tank. So that would put us to about 1990. And that's when I kind of got into sharks, and I was importing white-tip reef sharks and stuff from Hawaii, and black tips and nurse sharks. And I had kiddie pools set up in the garage with these homemade biological setups, basically styrofoam containers with live sand in them. And I'd pump the water into the live sand, and the live sand would go through the water would go through the live sand and dump back into these kiddie pools that I had in the garage. And a couple of my favorite sharks that were white tip reef sharks, I had in my 240-gallon display, which was a little bit too small. And around 1995, was when I commissioned my 480-gallon display to be built. And so I had that set up as a shark tank for a while. It was set up as a racetrack type of tank with a central overflow. And sharks got to be a pain in the ass. I'm not a maintenance person, I'll admit that. And feeding sharks daily became a messy and cumbersome task. And eventually I burnt out on the sharks. My last sharks were sold to the Mirage Casino in Vegas. And that's when I got into reef keeping. So that had been right around 1996. I got into reef keeping. And then 97 is when we bought our new house. And at that point, I basically Once escrow closed, we chopped into the walls, and within 3 days, I had the tank set up there, built in, and up and running, with all the livestock moved from the other house. And that was pretty much all she wrote. I had that 500-gallon display right up until January of this year, January of 2020, when I finally sold it.
What kind of equipment did you have in the 500-gallon? What was like the basics of the setup?
Well, it was kind of an evolution. So, initially I had metal halides and VHO lighting over it, with a hodgepodge of little giants of walkies and all that other stuff. And in 2010, my electric bills were pushing $1,100 a month. My chiller was running 12 hours a day. And at that point, I invested a whole bunch of money, and I redesigned my sump and refugium, or just redesigned a sump and built a refugium, got rid of the wet dry, got rid of all the halides, switched over to LEDs, and I was an early adopter. I went to Reef Techs back then. Dropped my electric bill from $1,100 a month to about $350.
Wow.
Didn't need a chiller anymore. It was kind of miraculous. I switched over to Reflows, and they were cool for a while. And then I came into the Royal Exclusiv RD3 pump. 2010, I was running an Alpha 300, Vertex Alpha 300. Handful of years later, I had upgraded to different LEDs capsules incidentally, and then found the Royal Exclusiv RD3 230s. Put one of those into the system on my closed loop and loved it so much I bought another one for my return pump. And then from there, it just kind of migrated. The reflows were out of the system, so I had the two RD3 230s. And then I guess it would have been around 2017 or 2018 when GHL released their LX7, the Mitras LX7 or 7206s. I added 6 of those to the system. So essentially, I had two RD3 230s. I had a Messatunzi circulation pump, 6205s and 6105s, 8 Kessel 360 WEs, which I kept those just because I love the shimmer. And then the Mitras became my primary lighting. And that was pretty much all, and then a Bubble King Supermarin 250. And I'll note that all of which I bought out of my own pocket. I wasn't working for Exclusiv at the time, but clearly I was an enthusiast, and I think it was my enthusiasm and knowledge of the product that got me involved directly with Royal Exclusiv in a support model or a support role with them.
What kind of, was it a mixed reef? Was it an SPS dominant reef?
It was a mix. I had all kinds of soft coral, SPS coral, LPS coral, pretty much everything, that was grown from frags. It just was literally growing out of the water, but it was such a hodgepodge. And it got to the point where I was literally having to rip LPS or SP or soft corals out of the tank just to make room for more SPS, because there was no real estate for coral in there anymore. It was just out of control. And I'm one of those people, I don't subscribe to that low nutrient system. I ran high nutrients. My nitrates were pushing 25 and my phosphates were 0.25. And, people,
Wow.
would like, that's crazy. My pH 7.8, at night, 8.0 during the day. And, I wasn't one to chase numbers. Again, I mentioned it before, I'm not a maintenance person. My tank was pretty much in cruise control. I ran a calcium reactor that was very well tuned. Set it and forget it. And my tank just took care of itself. I mean, granted, I did have everything automated, from my Genesis Renew automatic water change system to, my homegrown ATO that was controlled by my Apex and my GHL Profilux. But, it was set it and forget it. I mean, the only thing I did do was clean the glass, and I was pretty bad about doing that too.
How did you find the transition between the halides, to the LEDs in terms of your SPS? Did you see any drop off in the growth, or was it pretty much same as what you had with the halides?
That would have been back around 2010, and to be honest, I didn't really have any SPS back then. I had a mix of mostly soft corals and LPS at the time. I was really never into the SPS corals personally. I like the movement that you get with the soft corals, especially when you've got the wave motion in the tank. So that, to me, was always very soothing and more natural. And being a scuba diver, I mean, most SPS corals in the ocean are kind of bland looking. So it never really excited me terribly much. And I think, I was probably well into my investment in LEDs that some friends gave me some SPS coral. And I took them begrudgingly, to be honest, because I was never really into them. And naturally, my luck, they took off. And so, from there, I obviously bought more SPS and acquired more SPS along the way. And I was fortunate. I was just, really successful with it. And I know lighting and I understand what corals need. And so from that aspect, I never overdid it. I never, bumped my lights up out of control. I've kind of always felt that par meters were kind of a waste, but I will note that when I transitioned from metal halide to LED, I did use par meters to kind of measure the par with the halides and match my LEDs as closely as possible, par wise, and also color wise, which I used my eyes obviously to kind of make that migration. So I didn't shock my corals, and the end result was that the transition was seamless. And I use that same method when I switched from the Reef Techs to Kessels, and when I switched from Kessels to the Mitras. It's about the only time I ever used par meters, because I don't really believe they give you a very accurate reading when it comes to what corals need. I think they're very misleading.
Yeah, no, that's a smart move. You always, I think it's always very wise to take things slow with a reef tank, and you don't want to make any too sudden changes, and that's not going to
Yes.
be good for everything. I am still using metal halides on my tank. I got the video loop running behind us, but I don't have any issues with the heat because my tank is in the basement and it's Vermont, and usually in the summertime it doesn't get too warm out, here. So I have still resisted the LEDs, but I certainly think it's probably time to give them a shot at one point. So
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in LEDs. I mean, they've been good for me. So
Scott, let's talk now about Royal Exclusiv, and full disclosure, I do sell your products, but I only do sell products that I actually use and believe in. But getting that out of the way, what how did you end up? Well, I think you already talked about how you ended up with Royal Exclusiv, but just tell us a little bit about the company. What's the mission? What are they all about?
well, they kind of see themselves as a boutique shop. Most of their products, especially when you look at like the dream boxes and stuff, they're made to order, all handmade, as is all their other products. Their skimmers, their pumps are all hand assembled and stuff. It's not a large production company. They don't want to be a large production company. They want to cater to the mid to high end crowd, and quality first. Klaus, the owner of the company, he's a engineer type of person, and he's always got his hands on everything, which is good because he takes a lot of pride in the products that he develops, and it shows in the quality of the products as well. But as many people know and some don't know, Royal Exclusiv is obviously coveted for the Red Dragon brand of pumps and the Bubble King skimmers. But then they have their Dreambox product line that are unlike any other product out there. And a lot of people out there make sumps, but they kind of take the whole designing and building of a sump to a whole nother level that you don't find anywhere. I mean, the fact that people are building PVC sumps is no surprise, and the dream boxes are PVC, but unlike everybody else, every panel on the dream box is CNC cut, and every seam is interlocking. So it's not just flat seam against flat seam that's welded or solvent welded. These seams all interlock, so that it kind of goes together like a jigsaw puzzle. And ultimately, I mean, it makes it basically impossible to blow a seam on these things. And they're solvent welded, and the owner of the company, Klaus, hand welds every single seam himself with his key based welder, which is kind of unheard of. You really don't see many owners of companies doing that kind of hands-on work, and at the end of the day, it really kind of shows in the quality of the products. But they don't envision themselves as a mass production company. As I said, they kind of want to cater to the niche market where really people are not cutting corners, when only the best will do. And that's the one thing that I respect the most about the product line, is quality first. And the other neat thing about it is that all the products, whether you're looking at pumps or you're looking at the skimmers, are all conservatively rated. And that's not something that you typically find in this industry, where most people will rate a pump, and say it's X amount of gallons an hour, and they don't generally produce that kind of flow. That's not something that you'll find with Royal Exclusiv. And the other thing is too, and I find myself in this quagmire all the time, where people come to me about skimmers, and I'm always telling them to go smaller, because our skimmers are very overrated, or conservatively rated, rather, not overrated. They're underrated. They're conservatively rated. People have a hard time understanding why somebody involved in a business would be recommending a smaller skimmer versus trying to upsell to a larger skimmer. And it's just because, if you want one to perform properly, sometimes less is more.
Oh, you still there, Scott?
I am here.
Okay, all right, lost you for a second. Yeah, no, I always, I thought bigger was it was okay to be better, to be bigger in terms of a skimmer, and yeah, that's something that I didn't realize until you and I talked about it a few years ago, and I had a skimmer that was rated I guess too high for my bioload and for my tank, and the way you explain it to me is that the skimmer doesn't, if it's too oversized, it's not going to be operating full time, right? And then it's just going to stop skimming, and then the organics are going to build up, and it's going to be an inefficient way to pull out, the organics in a tank.
Yep, that's correct. It's all based on neck size, and the bigger the skimmer, the larger the neck volume. Well, the larger the neck volume, the more dissolved organics you need to generate enough foam to fill that neck. And in the absence of enough dissolved organics, you don't make foam, you make bubbles, and bubbles don't generate skim mates. So you end up with a skimmer that'll generate great foam for a couple of days, and then it slows down and just creates bubbles until the organics build back up enough that it can generate a sufficient foam head to fill the neck. And it's what we refer to as inconsistent skimming, and it's generally a sign of an oversized skimmer relative to the bio load. So when you look at skimmer ratings from any manufacturer, they typically give a size range, and at the low end of that size range, it's assumed that you'll have a heavy load. Well, in our terms, a heavy load is a ½ inch of fish per display gallon. And most people don't understand that. I hear, I've got a heavy load all the time. Well, coral doesn't generate a lot of dissolved organics. Our sumps and refugiums really don't contribute to the load. They contribute to load reduction. So we focus on the display size and the true fish load, because that's where the dissolved organics that are going to help us generate a good foam head are going to be. And that's typically how I would base skimmer sizing. And it's a lesson that I learned on my own over the years, using oversized skimmers on my systems and fighting the inconsistent nature of them.
Right. So, if somebody wanted to kind of start from scratch a new system, and they were looking for a sump and a skimmer and the return pump and the whole 9 yards, I guess there's a number of things that come into play here, right? You mentioned bio load and how many fish are in a tank, and I guess it depends in terms of whether a tank is going to be an SPS dominant tank or a softy tank or LPS or a mixed reef or whatever the case may be. What's your advice in terms of people that want to kind of start a brand new system, and what kind of information do they need to gather to help you guys plan out a full-blown system for
them? Well, as obviously we don't build tanks, so our focus is on skimmers, pumps, and sumps. But the first question I'm going to ask obviously is going to be what the display size is. As that's going to be relative to the skimmer sizing, and then secondly, what the fish load stock plan is. Coral, that really doesn't have much of a bearing in terms of what I would envision, as far as skimmer sizing and stuff like that. And then the flip side also, would be is what type of sump they want. I mean, are they going to run filter socks? Are they planning on running fleece filtration setup? Because if you're running a fleece filtration setup, that changes everything, because the fleece, technology typically removes the solids before they ever become dissolved. And the end result is much less dissolved solids in the water. And so bearing that in mind, we typically recommend stepping down at least a size in the skimmer. And then, of course, the fish load plays into this as well, because, the truth of the matter is you can have 1,000-gallon display, and if you've only got a dozen fish in there or 20 fish in there, you'd be better off with a skimmer that's rated for 180-gallon display, or whatever, that load size would be comparable or relative to in terms of skimmer sizing. So it's not just about display sizing, but load size. And then you factor in, what the, filtration methodology, mechanical filtration over and above the skimmer is going to be, whether, like I said, filter socks, fleece roll, particularly fleece roll is going to impact the decision-making process there as well. And then, of course, pumps. If you're running fleece, you don't want the same kind of flow that you might want, in the absence of a fleece filter setup, because fleece performs much better with lower flow. Especially when you consider that most fleece filters, or like the Royal Exclusiv green boxes, are triggered by sump level. If you have too much flow going through a sump, you end up with turbulence in the sump, and that may prematurely trigger the fleece roll to activate, and the end result is you end up wasting fleece. So slower flow is better in that case. And so those are some of the questions that I would ask, in terms of what the plans are, and what they're looking for in a sump, so that I can aid in making or helping them make appropriate decisions as far as ancillary equipment goes.
Yeah, sometimes I hear people talk about, well, I want to start let's say a 200-gallon system, but I want to get some equipment that would allow me to potentially go bigger in the future. That's based on what you're talking about, that's probably going to be a difficult thing to do, right, in terms of buying equipment for a tank and then trying to size up later on?
Well, I mean, it's really not. When it comes to sumps, I'm a firm believer that bigger is always better. And same with pumps too. You really can't have too big of a pump, especially these days when you can control the flow on them. And those are two key components. Now, skimmer sizing, that's a whole other quagmire, and I get that question an awful lot. I've got a 100-gallon tank and I'm planning 180-gallon, in a year. Can I get a 200 size skimmer? And my usual recommendation is to people in that case is to hold off, use what you got now, and when you're ready to upgrade, upgrade. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting it. And unless they really want to run it wet and are willing to deal with a little bit of inconsistency, sometimes waiting is better, sometimes less is more. But from my aspect, being a high nutrient guy, dissolved organics going up and down is really not that big of a deal, as long as you understand how your skimmer is going to perform. We as hobbyists tend to chase numbers, and we tend to chase things. We're always fine tuning everything, and an inconsistent skimmer can drive people batty. And so as long as you understand that it's going to be inconsistent, and realize that, if you go oversized, you're never going to, it's going to produce well one day and the next day it's not. If you understand that and you don't try to chase it too much, you won't go too nuts. But normally I'd recommend, staying with size appropriate stuff and upgrading when the time comes and the situation's appropriate. No point in pissing money in the wind.
Good advice. So you mentioned fleece roller mats and Royal Exclusiv. That's a relatively new product for you guys, right, in terms of dream boxes with the mats?
Well, the Dream Box has been on the market now for about 2 years, so I wouldn't say it's all that new,
with
but
the
obviously,
fleece, right?
right. Unlike Dream Box 2s and the filter sock Dream Boxes that have been on the market for several years or more. So in terms of the company, it's a relatively new product, and they're currently coming out with other iterations like the Eco Dream Box 3, and then the Step Dream Boxes, which are scalable, smaller versions. So we do have a fairly wide product range in the fleece things, including now standalone fleece filters that are basically add-ons to existing sumps. So that's also a very new product.
So talk more about the Eco Fleece Dream Box. What's unique on that versus other smaller sumps somebody might be able to find out there?
Well, it uses the same methodology as the existing Dream Box. So it's a very high-end fleece motor. It's just a scaled down solution, and some areas where they made the box smaller to appeal to a more budget conscious crowd. But make no mistake, I mean, these are high-end boxes, whether you're looking at the Eco Dream Box, the Step Dream Box, or the standard full-fledged Dream Box 3. It's just something that's targeted at a lower budget crowd that has a more small system.
Yep, makes sense. So Scott, anything you could talk about that's in the pipeline, on the horizon that hasn't been talked a lot about? Royal Exclusiv, any new products?
Well, yeah, we're in the process of releasing a DC line. There's been some mandates in Europe, particularly where pumps and consumer grade pumps and stuff like that that are variable speed need to adhere to 12 volt or low voltage technology. So Royal Exclusiv is launching a new line of DC based pumps that will operate at 12 and 24 volts to meet those requirements. And, the end result is, too, that, without cutting corners, these are lower cost pumps. They are obviously geared more towards the mid-range market, unlike the RD3s that are more of a high-end pump. But, it's a no sacrifice DC type of pump, whereas the RD3 runs at a much higher variable speed voltage. These will operate at more, the 12 and 24 volt market. And, there'll be an 85 watt. There's a 45 watt, the 40 or 40 watt. That'll be available both as a skimmer pump and a flow pump. And they'll be released here in the States probably in the next 60 days with our next shipment coming from Germany. So that's a new product on the market to look forward. Excuse me. And we also recently released our Step Dream Box, which I kind of briefly touched on, and that's a Dream Box that you can order in different sizes. Historically, you weren't able to custom order a Dream Box and say, I want it, X size. We have our cookie cutter sizes that they adhere to, for cost reasons because of all the CNC work and CAD work that goes into it. Sorry, my Great Dane seems to be really.
We got another guest.
Yes, we have another guest. And then the other Great Dane just decided to guys, stop. Come on. Guys, go on. So it must be near
Broke your train of thought
for them or dinner time. Yeah. So the Step Dream Box, unlike all the other ones, you can order it in 10 centimeter increments. So you can say I wanted 100 centimeters or 110 centimeters or 150 or 160 centimeters long by, whatever wide in 10 centimeter increments. So that's something new that they're doing. And they also have a variation of those Step Dream Boxes. It has a built-in ATO tank, which is also very unique to the Dream Box product line. And like any of the Dream Boxes, every corner, every panel is CNC cut, every seam is interlocking. So again, it's kind of a no compromise solution, but it is aimed at a more budget conscious crowd. And in particular, they were originally kind of developed for the Red Sea reefer market, which, is a pretty confined space. So, that product is, kind of unique in that we can get them under the Red Sea reefers and customers can scale this size for smaller applications. And I think they go up to 150 centimeters long, which isn't, necessarily small by many people's standards. So,
and Scott, so these are all, the Dream Boxes are all pretty much customizable, right? You guys do sell certain sets, but they're all customizable and they're all manufactured in Germany, correct?
That's correct. All manufactured in Germany. And, when we say customizable, you can choose your seam color. You can choose your intake sizing. Output sizing is typically based on whatever pump is going to be running it, whether it's a Royal Exclusiv pump or something else. So you choose that. We have wire fasteners built into the Dream Box as an option. We have media reactors that get built-in dosing tubes that can be built into it as well, so that you can just hook your dosing lines directly into it. And there's little PVC pipes, like 4 millimeter or 6 millimeter pipes that run into the water. Things of that nature. Special controller holders for the RD3s and RDXs and RD5 eco pumps. Obviously, the lids are CNC cut for Bubble King skimmers if that's something that they want. That basically, in a nutshell, that covers a lot of the customization there.
So you guys have a warehouse in the United States, and you do carry stock in terms of skimmers and pumps and other items, right? But the Dream Boxes are right now manufactured in Germany. Any plans at all in the near future or next couple of years to manufacture Dream Boxes in the U.S.?
At this point, no. There's part of that lure that things are built in Germany, and as I touched on before, the owner Klaus, he basically goes over every one of those Dream Boxes himself and hand welds those things, and that's an art. And to bring that product line and start manufacturing it here in the U.S., while it sounds great on paper, the quality control is a concern. And when you have an owner that is invested in his products the way that Klaus does, and the quality shows, as a result, to try to duplicate him, I mean, let's face it, this isn't a coral that we can frag. If we can cut off one of his arms and stick it in some water and grow another Klaus out here like we can an SPS coral, that would be great. But unfortunately, fragging Klaus just isn't going to fly. And any sort of that would result in a compromise in quality. So I really don't see that happening. And at the end of the day, too, when you look at some of the materials like the front panels on a dream box, everybody else will take, that makes a PVC sump out there. They bond acrylic to the front panel, and it doesn't bond properly, to be honest. And unlike everybody else, Royal Exclusiv uses a proprietary clear PVC for those panels to ensure that the bond lasts forever. And you can't get that material here in the U.S. So to ship those kind of panels across the pond to start a production line out here really would be cost effective. And, I know people look at the costs on shipping a dream box, but if you go to any other sump maker and you ask them to build something that's even remotely comparable, it doesn't cost as much as people might think.
Yeah, I tell you, I have a dream box that I've been using from you guys from, about 5 years now, and that thing is bulletproof.
Oh, yeah. It'll outlast your tank, and that's one thing people don't realize, that these things will not fail. I mean, you could park a truck on one of those things, and, it'll hold up. You can try that with an acrylic tank, and we all know, acrylic crazes over the years, and, just is not a lifetime kind of product, whereas the dream box will outlast most people in this hobby by a long shot.
So, Scott, I don't want to keep you any longer. Any final thoughts you wanted to share with the audience?
Well, you kind of mentioned it earlier. Nothing good comes quickly in this hobby, and that's something that the sword that I live by and die by, and it's a message I always try to tell people. Take it slow. As hobbyists, we want to be in this hobby a long time, and we have people that come and go from this hobby, and it's usually because their experiences aren't positive. The losses pile up, and the success rate, dwindles. And so from my experience in this hobby, as I said, nothing good comes quickly in this hobby. Take it slow. If you put a tank together, when I do my installs, and I do a fair amount of high-end installs, I usually encourage the customers to wait several months to a year before they put coral into a tank, because if you do that and you let the system truly stabilize, you're going to be a lot more successful. And what people don't realize is it's not just about what we can read on our test kits. There's so much more to a tank maturing than your initial nitrification cycle. So take it slow, be patient, let the system mature before you start putting things into it, and you'll be a lot more successful in the long run.
I totally agree. I think you gotta just be in it for the long haul. It's the instant gratification can be a curse for some people. They just want to stock a tank and put some corals in there, and they just want to kind of see the finished result right off the bat. And I always say to myself, you know what? Just take it slow, and it's gonna pay off in the long run. And also
Right.
I'm a big advocate of using live rock and live sand and
Absolutely.
versus dry rock. There's some beautiful dry rock tanks out there, but I think it takes even longer to get an established bacterial bed with a dry rock only tank. So those could be really tricky.
Yep, I concur with you there. I'm a firm believer in using live rock. It's kind of a shame because back in the 80s and 90s, when I really got into this hobby, and mid 90s, when I was getting live rock, and it was a lot different than what you see now. I mean, Walt Smith, he's a pioneer in this hobby in terms of rock, and boy, what he brought to the table back in the 90s and 80s from Fiji was just unbelievable. I mean, you get rock that had coral and all kinds of stuff on it, and you just don't see that these days. And it's a shame. But then again, we've raped our oceans to the point where even finding quality rock, if they could collect it, which a lot of them can't anymore because of the laws, it's just not like what it was. But any kind of live rock, as long as it's got the bacterial and it's well seasoned, is definitely a benefit to the tank, and certainly helps kickstart that maturity process and the biological diversification.
Hey, Scott, a quick question from the lone aquarist. He's wondering if you're still active on Reef to Reef. He was also asking about if you're still running your large fish tank, but we already talked about the beginning. So, no, he moved to Montana, and he's hoping to start another reef tank at some point, maybe in the next year or so. But are you still active on Reef to Reef there, Scott?
I am on Reef to Reef. We seem to get a lot of inquiries through Reef Central, which tends to be where I spend most of my time. Obviously, since my tank is not up, I have not been staying on top of my build thread on both Reef Central and Reef to Reef. My last updates were basically, I think, this is the beginning of the end, or the beginning of a new beginning, I might say. So no, I have not been that active, but I do go to Reef, and you're welcome to send me a friend request on Facebook as well. Obviously, I do provide lots of updates to through my Facebook followers. So I'm Scott Leif on Facebook, Leif. So feel free to send me a friend request there and follow along on my new journey and some of the other stuff that I'll be doing, which also still involves fish. Just not necessarily going to involve saltwater in the immediate term, but I'm going to take what I know and bring that into putting food on the table in the with the addition of an aquaponics system that I'm designing and building.
Awesome. Well, listen, Scott, thank you, man, so much for being a guest on the show. Really appreciate it. And, you and I will be in touch very soon.
Well, look forward to it, and thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So that'll do it for this show. I want to give, again, Scott, my sincere thanks for being a guest on the show. Next Wednesday at 5 p.m., I'm going to have Richard from the Aficionado channel on. So I hope everybody will tune in. Should be an interesting show. Until then, so long.